Hi, our friend Gerard Mokhiber, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
It's great to be with you, Abdul Jalil. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much. In your opinion, why didn't the United Nations protect the people of Gaza?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I think in order to answer it, you have to begin with the realization that there are actually two United Nations. One of the United Nations is the United Nations of the human rights, independent human rights mechanisms, the United Nations of the humanitarian workers, the United Nations of the heroic UNRWA workers who have continued to courageously serve the communities of Gaza throughout the genocide, often at risk to their own life. More than 310 of them have been murdered in the Israeli genocide, many along with their families. There's no criticism of them. They have, as I said, been absolutely heroic. The independent human rights mechanisms of the Human Rights Council, like the Special Rapporteur on Palestine, Francesca Albanese, a dozen other special rapporteurs, Commission of Inquiry, they have all been very principled in defending Palestinian human rights, in calling out Israeli crimes, and in demanding accountability for Israeli perpetrators and protection for Palestinian victims. So that part of the UN, I have no complaints about. They are doing their job. It also has to be said that the International Court of Justice, the World Court, is also a part of the UN. And because of their courage and principle, Israel is now on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. That's a process that moves very slowly, but so far in every proceeding has come down on the side of the Palestinian people in this current genocide. So that side of the UN, I think we can't complain about. It is functioning as it is supposed to. But there's another UN. It's the UN that is the political side of the house. It is the UN of the Security Council, the UN of the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the Office of the Special Advisor on Genocide. It is the UN even of the General Assembly. The General Assembly has done some very good things, important things. It has adopted resolutions under the Uniting for Peace process that are very meaningful, but it has not used the totality of its power, all of its options to address this historic horror of the genocide in Palestine. The Security Council, for what it's worth, meeting again today to try to adopt a ceasefire resolution. All predictions are that the US will again veto the ceasefire resolution. Security Council has failed to adopt a meaningful ceasefire. It has failed to provide a protection force. It has failed to provide military intervention. It has failed even to remove Israel, the perpetrator regime, from the United Nations. That piece of the UN is an absolute failure. And then we look at the political offices under the Secretary General. Secretary General has been criticized for a few very mild statements that he has made, but the Secretary General, the High Commissioner, other senior political figures in the organization, they continue to hide behind the language of both sides. They continue to hide behind the language of conflict and conflict resolution. They continue to hide behind the safe language of humanitarian aid and the promise of a two-state solution somewhere down the road. Those are not appropriate responses to a genocide. The two sides here are occupier and occupied, oppressor and oppressed, genocidaire and victims. It is not two sides in a conflict where you have to be careful how you address both sides. And no one in the political leadership of the UN has had the courage to address it in that way. Neither of they had the courage to talk about the root causes. They'd rather talk about an amorphous promise of a two-state solution someday, but they have not had the courage to talk about what is at the root of this horror, which is ethno-nationalism, which is apartheid, which is a brutal occupation, and which, of course, is a genocidal plan that goes back not just to October of 2023, but all the way back to 1947, when these assaults began in the first place. So they have failed, and I think miserably so. I think that history will judge them harshly for not using their positions where they have a public pulpit that can be influential, where they have some political influence, and where they certainly have a moral opportunity to declare what needs to be heard by the world in order to mobilize an adequate response. In the end, the failure is not a failure of international law, because the law is clear, and Israel is in clear violation of international human rights law, international humanitarian law, international criminal law, international refugee law, and the UN Charter itself. It is in clear violation of all of those things. The failure is a failure of enforcement. And a part of that is because of the abdication of actors in the UN system who have not had the courage to do their job. But a part of it is also by design. What can you say about an international system that has at its helm an undemocratic body like the Security Council that gets to decide whether or not international law is enforced, whether or not the decisions and opinions of the International Court of Justice are enforced, for example, whether or not a ceasefire takes place? I mean, that is the flaw in the system by design. And with all the talk about UN reform today, there is no meaningful proposal to change that fundamental reality that takes a system that declares it's based on the international rule of law, but in practice is based on raw geopolitics and a deference to power, including abusive power, when that power is derived from any of the permanent members of the Security Council, in this case, especially the United States. So I think we have to continue to pressure the United Nations to do the right thing, because they are receiving a lot of pressure to do the wrong thing from Israel, from the US, from the UK, from other Western powers. And so they need to hear from society. They need to hear from all of us to feel the pressure to push it back in the direction of justice.
In your opinion, is the West Israel's partner in this genocide?
The West is absolutely a partner in this genocide. And it is not just a political statement. It is a statement of a crime that is specifically defined under international law, including in the Genocide Convention, which is the crime of complicity. The genocide that's being perpetrated in Palestine by the Israeli regime could not continue without the direct support of the government of the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, some complicity from the European Union, and others. And therefore, they are also accountable as co-perpetrators in this genocide. Take the United States, for example. From the very first day, it has provided money and weapons and intelligence and ammunition and diplomatic cover. It has used its official podiums to disseminate Israeli propaganda, including justifications for war crime and language that is dehumanizing of the Palestinians in Gaza. And it has even used its veto, maybe for the sixth time today, we'll see, in order just to block a simple ceasefire, recognizing that after every US veto, thousands more Palestinian children and women and men were massacred in Israel's genocide. So the West shares the blame. This is not an Israeli genocide. It is principally an Israeli-US genocide, but with the complicity of other governments, as I said, including the UK and Germany and Canada, and a host of other members of the Western Europe and other group of states in the United Nations.
Do you believe that one day international courts will give justice to the Palestinian people and punish those responsible for the genocide?
Well, it depends on how you define justice, Abdel Jalil. I mean, I think there is no doubt that the law is on the side of Palestine. There is no doubt in my mind that if it is allowed to complete its work, the International Court of Justice will affirm that Israel is perpetrating a genocide. Sadly, that takes a couple of years. That's not something that happens in a matter of weeks or months. By then, it's too late to save a lot of lives, but they will certainly come down on the side of justice if they're allowed to do that. The International Criminal Court, which, as you know, is not a part of the UN, but is just down the road in The Hague, I think they too will continue to take a principled line. They have so far. However, they are under extraordinary pressure to obstruct justice. Israeli intelligence agencies are providing threats and inducement to judges and officers of the court behind the scenes and have been doing so for many years to prevent them from doing their job against Israeli perpetrators. The government of the United States has imposed unlawful sanctions on the prosecutor's office and threatened the International Criminal Court more broadly with sanctions. Individuals. It has also threatened the International Criminal Court. It has gone so far as to pass a law in the US, which has been nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act, threatening to invade the Netherlands and take over the International Criminal Court if it prosecutes Israelis or Americans for their crimes. So there's an open question as to whether or not the International Criminal Court will be able to fulfill its functions, but they have taken the first steps in indicting. Remember that separate from the genocide case in the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court has indicted for crimes against humanity Israel's senior-most leaders, including its prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and its former defense minister, Yoav Gallant. And it has been just revealed that as the prosecutor was forced to temporarily step down, he was preparing additional indictments for other high-level Israeli perpetrators. So the law is clearly on the side of the Palestinian people at the international level, but enforcement is under threat from rogue states, including the most powerful state at the moment, which is the United States of America. If we see a unification among other states, the states of the region, the states of the global south, the states of more principled governments in Europe, and of the parties to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, if they can be unified to demand justice and to defend the court, then we may see a good outcome coming out of the ICC as well. But justice will not come from the UN. It will not come from these international tribunals. It will come from all of us, just as it came from people, from civil society, from social movements, labor unions, and others in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, recognizing that the West, and especially the United States, supported the apartheid regime in South Africa all the way through the 1980s and classified Nelson Mandela as a terrorist even 4 years after he was released from prison. That change did not come from international institutions. It certainly didn't come from governments. It came from people demanding that their governments and international institutions do the right thing. And ultimately, it came from the perseverance and the resistance of the South African people, but the solidarity of the rest of us. And that's what needs to happen also in Palestine.
What's the role of civil society, especially student movement, in helping the Palestinian cause?
Well, we've seen some absolutely heroic action on the part of civil society. You mentioned the student movements, for example. What's amazing about that is, first of all, they initiated that out of just a raw moral outrage at the world's first live-streamed genocide in Palestine. They just came together in horror and decided that they needed to take a stand. What's also amazing about that is that it has seen an unprecedented crackdown like we have not seen in these countries before, where on behalf of an oppressive foreign regime, Israel, the government of the United States has mobilized its full domestic power in order to smear, slander, abuse, beat, arrest, expel, fire, persecute these human rights defenders on college campuses on behalf of an oppressive foreign regime. That's pretty unprecedented as well. But what is truly remarkable is that despite all of that repression, that movement of students and others has continued to grow and to grow and to grow, that they have not been deterred, they continue to speak out. And now you're hearing a slight change in the official conversations in the West, in part compelled by this demand from the public, students and others. All of the hope that we have is in civil society. It's in students in churches and mosques and synagogues and labor unions and social movements and NGOs and in all of us. That's where the hope comes from. And we need to continue a sustained pushback to make that change. The other remarkable thing, I think, Abdul Jalil, is you see so many of these kinds of citizen people's initiatives. Right now, you have the Freedom Flotilla, which is a people's initiative to bring a ship, including Greta Thunberg and others, carrying humanitarian supplies to Gaza. That is a people's initiative. They're amazingly courageous, being threatened by drones and threats from the Israeli regime and others, but they continue to sail. There is an organization, there is the organization now of a people's march to Gaza that would march through the Sinai in order to approach the gates of the prison that is Gaza, entirely led by people, by civil society, by people of conscience from all around the world that is being organized. There is a people's tribunal that is functioning, that is not going to wait for official institutions. It's called the Gaza Tribunal. People can read about it at the gazatribunal.com. That has just adopted the Sarajevo Declaration, pronouncing on the demands of the world for justice and freedom in Palestine and an end to the genocide. So where institutions and governments have failed, the people are stepping up, the movement is growing, and ultimately, it's going to change the course of history. In the meantime, we're all forced to witness the horrors coming out of Palestine every day in this terrible, terrible genocide that's being perpetrated by the Israeli regime. But they will not prevail because the whole world is mobilized against it.
Thank you. Excuse me. My last question, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the fate of the Palestinians' cause?
I'm horrified by what the Palestinian people have had to endure for 100 years now. I'm especially horrified by the upsurge in genocide that's been perpetrated for the past 600 days. The salvation that needs to come from society is too little and too late at this moment. Gaza is destroyed. People are suffering incredible anguish. But I know that Palestine will prevail. There is no question in my mind that this project of conquest of the Palestinian people, this project based in ethno-supremacism, based in apartheid, based in racism and violence of the Israeli regime, cannot be sustained. And what gives me hope is the fact that just in the past, less than 2 years, the movement for Palestinian liberation and for Palestinian solidarity around the world has grown more than in all of the history of Palestine's historic struggle against colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. That movement will continue to grow. We all have a part in it. There will be enormous suffering between now and when we ultimately see Palestinian liberation, but that's not an excuse to give up. That's a command for us all to double our efforts in order to make sure that we witness respect for international human rights, respect for the principle of equality, respect for the idea of justice, and hope for a free Palestine. That's the job of all of us, Abdul Jalil.
3%. Thank you, my friend, Gerard Mokhiber. Thank you very much to accepting our invitation. See you again. Thank you.
My honor to be with you. Thank you, Abdul Jalil.